Good evening, everyone. Let's start this evening by closing our eyes. I'd like all of you to repeat after me. Let's begin with just a short affirmation. Beloved God, I set aside all thoughts and cares of this material world to go within and be alone with Thee. If we look at our lives objectively and look at the world today, it is a very challenging world that we live in, isn't it? And think about it. You look around and there seems to be chaos and unrest and fear and uncertainty and hatred. You know, the list goes on and on and on. And we try to live our lives in the midst of this seeming chaos and try to spiritualize it, try the best of our ability to figure out what's our place in the midst of all of this. And we ask this question, are circumstances controlling our lives? I'd like to start by reading a few short quotes from Guruji's autobiography of a yogi, because until we really understand life and life's purpose, how can we begin to even think that we can have any control over it? And from the autobiography, you may remember how Babaji had called Lahiri Mahashai to the Himalayan cave and given him his Kriya Yoga, and there was a little interchange between Lahiri Mahashai and Babaji, where Babaji said, "Bestow the Kriya key only on qualified chelas. He who vows to sacrifice all in the quest of the divine is fit to unravel the final mysteries of life through the science of meditation." Vows to sacrifice all was what Babaji said. And Lahiri Mahashai said, "Angelic Guru, as you have already favored mankind by resurrecting the lost Kriya art, will you not increase that benefit by relaxing the strict requirements of discipleship? I pray that you permit me to communicate Kriya to all sincere seekers, even though at first they may not be able to vow themselves to complete inner renunciation. The tortured men and women of the world, pursued by the threefold suffering, need special encouragement. They may never attempt the road to freedom if Kriya initiation be withheld from them. Be it so. The divine wish has been expressed through you. Give Kriya to all who humbly ask for help," Babaji replied. And after a silence, he added, "Repeat to each of your disciples this majestic promise from the Bhagavad Gita. Swapamapyasha dharmasha trayate mahato bhayat." Even a little practice of this dharma, this religious rite, will save you from great fear, the colossal sufferings inherent in the repeated cycles of birth and death. I think this is a very significant part of Paramahansa Yogananda's message in the autobiography, because as I look out and see the faces of our beloved Guru's disciples gathered from all over the world, the light, the love, the joy that I see in your faces, it began here. Because how many of us were ready for complete renunciation? This tradition goes back in India, only the ascetics who left the world. Complete inner renunciation. So I think when we think about our lives in the world today, it's very important for us to develop an attitude toward our lives, first and foremost, based upon the blessings that each and every one of us experience every moment of our lives. Earlier this year, I was in India at Ranchi, where we dedicated a new meditation hall. There were over 1,000 devotees there from all over India, and also a good number of SRF members visiting. And once we had actually opened up the mandir and entered in for the consecration of the altar, there were too many people there to invite all in at the same time. So I was given the task of choosing some representative groups to go inside. And it was fairly easy for the Indian devotees, because I decided to take 2 representatives from each of the meditation groups, the cities. That was fairly easy. And then I asked for a list of the SRF devotees and where they were from. And as I went through the list, I was amazed to find out there were devotees from Australia and Africa and South America and Central America and North America and all over Europe and from Asia and from the Middle East. The whole world was represented, at least symbolically. And it impressed upon me to realize this is the depth and the breadth of this Guru's teachings. A Guru who left his physical body in the early 1950s, and yet this work continues to grow with such great strength. And particularly in India, where they've had this great and old tradition of you have to have a living Guru, which is usually interpreted as having a Guru in a physical body. And yet, Guruji's work thrives and grows, not just in India, but all over the world. Why? Why? Because we do have living Gurus. And we are part of a very special dispensation sent by God at what seems like a very troubled time in the world, outwardly. And it's based upon this promise that we're sitting here tonight. So as we begin to think about and discuss, our life circumstances controlling our lives, I think it should start with opening up our hearts in gratitude. Not just tonight, not just during convocation, but every day. Every day. Because out of the billions of souls on this earth, even the atheist, even the avowed atheist, when he's at his rope's end and he has no more hope, what does he usually cry? Oh God, help me. Isn't it? Intuitively, he knows there's a God. We all do. But out of the billions in the world, how many have a path, a direction, teaching, a true Guru, a living Guru, a line of Gurus, and have been drawn into the fold of a special dispensation sent by God? Very humbling, isn't it, when you think about it in those terms? I'll put that in a little more perspective as we go along. But I think when we face life and we face life's challenges, we should always begin there. And just as I started the evening with that short affirmation, to learn to think in those terms, to consciously set aside all thoughts and cares of the material world, and first, with gratitude, with great thanks to the Gurus, begin your life, begin your day, begin your battle of life in that consciousness. From Guruji's Bhagavad Gita commentary, from the moment of conception to the surrender of the last breath, man has to fight in each incarnation innumerable battles. Biological, hereditary, bacteriological, physiological, climatic, social, ethical, political, sociological, psychological, and metaphysical. Well, I'm out of breath. So many varieties of inner and outer conflicts. Competing for victory in every encounter are the forces of good and evil. And on top of everything else, there's this tug of war going on. The whole intent, this is the point, listen to this, the whole intent of the Gita is to align man's efforts on the side of Dharma or righteousness. The ultimate aim is self-realization of man's true self, the soul as made in the image of God, one with the ever-existing, ever-conscious, ever-new bliss of spirit. And here's the second point I'd like to bring to your attention tonight. Of all of the great blessings that these gurus have brought to our lives, they've also brought the purpose of life. How can you fight the battle of life if you don't know the purpose? Some years ago I read, I think it was a business book, and there was a little catchy saying there that said, imagine climbing to the top of the ladder of success in your life, total success, only to discover that the ladder's on the wrong building. No, we laugh, but look around. In our own lives, how many undertakings, how much of our time and energy and our focus have we put on something only to reach a dead end? A total dead end. No happiness, no fulfillment, no satisfaction, no results. Why? Why? Usually, if we analyze, because it wasn't addressing the real purpose of our lives. It's a key point. We have to understand that very much. You cannot forget that. If the purpose of life is to find God, and here we have, you are spirit. You are made in the image of God. And you can realize this truth through the practice of Kriya Yoga, wherein you are taught to go within, contact your true nature, and commune with God. Sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? That's all we have to do is just go within, contact God, and yet there's nothing more important than that. This is where it begins, and this is where it ends. If the purpose of life is to find God, and if we realize that our true nature is spirit, and that ultimately all of this that we see and feel and touch and smell and hear is delusion, is not reality, it's not reality. It's not reality. It's not real. What hope do we have? No wonder there's a tug of war. If the reality is within, and yet we feel trapped, we're in these bodies, isn't it? It's pretty real. Master said, a dream head, against a dream wall causes dream pain. We're still stuck here. I think we better join the atheist. God help. God help us. And of course we have, or we wouldn't be here. But you see my point. There is this tug of war that we're in. And we have these wonderful techniques, we have this wonderful teaching, but there's work. There's serious work for us to do. On top of that long list of challenges, Guruji said you are born with about 75% of your life predetermined. by your past. 75%. It's pretty grim, doesn't it? But Guruji said you will make up the remaining 25%. If you yourself, through your own free choice and effort of will, do not determine what that 25% will be, the 75% will make the 25% for you, and you will become a puppet. Right there's the answer. Right there's the answer. Free choice, effort of will. Free choice and effort of will. Action. And if we don't, you will be ruled absolutely by your past, by the influence and effects of your past tendencies. This is why spiritual training is vital. It takes into consideration not only the 75% of our lives that we already are, but also designates the methods to mold the brand new 25% that we ourselves are going to create by the exercise of our freedom. That's the answer right there. That's yoga. That's yoga in action right there. Through free will and freedom of choice, we can win this battle. That's what Guruji is saying. Guruji said the practice of a highly advanced technique, such as Kriya, is incompatible with a desultory spiritual life. Kriya Yoga is more than a meditation technique. It's more than just going within, but that's where it starts. We can't forget that. First and foremost, people would go to Guruji, our beloved Dayamata, and the other disciples that were around him. They didn't have satsangs like this. They didn't have long lectures. They didn't have classes. It was usually just two simple answers. One was, meditate, meditate, meditate. And the other was, keep your mind on God. Keep your mind here at the spiritual center. Over and over and over, he would repeat that with all his wisdom. That was two of his strongest messages. But it always began with meditate, meditate, meditate. Because it's only through meditation, it's only by setting aside our thoughts and cares of this material world and going within, withdrawing the life force. Withdrawing it from what? From the senses, from the instruments that perceive this world as being real. Drawing that consciousness inside, shutting off those instruments, magnetizing the spine, gradually raising the life force into the higher chakras where God can be experienced. And then in that consciousness, Guruji said meditate, 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 but also keep your mind on God. That's the other half of the equation. That's how we live in this world and not of it. If the purpose of life is to find God, if our true nature is spirit, we must, to the best of our ability, strive to contact that true self, and then through our actions throughout the day, to hang on to stay in that consciousness, to be in the world, but not of it. How does the Bhagavad Gita begin? You remember? That great text, that great guide to life, that great guide to yogic living, that great guide to liberation that our beloved Guru has given to the world, transcends time. The truth of that book, the power of that book, and the simplicity of that book transcends time. Again, it's one of those great blessings, those part of that great dispensation that's so much a part of our lives. And it begins by saying, on the holy plain of Kurukshetra, when my offspring and the sons of Pandu had gathered together, eager for battle, what did they, O Sanjay? What did they? The good and bad, symbolically. The negative and the positive, on the battlefield of life. How did they? The Bhagavad Gita begins with introspection. And this is another one of those keys, another one of those blessings emphasized by our Guru that's necessary if we're to win this battle of life. From the Bhagavad Gita, each devotee should analyze himself and find out whether he is living according to the upward evolutionary influence of nature, or by the even higher soul impulses, or only by his human nature, distorted by prenatal and postnatal effects of evil actions, karma, that manifest through habits, moods, and inclinations. How did they? If you're going to fight a battle, you need to know not only who the enemy is, but the nature of the enemy. When the sunshine of wisdom breaks upon the dark mind of the egotist, he realizes that the soul is the performer of all actions and not his unpredictable individuality, his ego, his little self, as perceived by the instruments, by identification with the world. The soul or spirit is the only activator. So if we're going to win this battle of life, we have to always act to the best of our ability from what state of consciousness? Soul consciousness. Soul consciousness. God gave us free will, and we have the choice in every moment of our lives to act from soul awareness. And if we don't have that soul awareness, that higher state of consciousness, or we have it to varying degrees, all the way from nirvikalpa samadhi to none at all, what do? We have the wisdom and the guidance of the Guru. Again, that's part of this great dispensation. Truth. Truth is it's never been given to mankind in our hands, in a modern, scientific, simple, understandable, doable language. Unique. That's our guide. And what do? Do we carry a Bhagavad Gita around with us under one arm and the second coming volume under the other? And there's a lot there to absorb. And that's why Guruji put so much emphasis on study. Now read a little bit, even if it's not a lot. Keep putting his thoughts into your consciousness. Keep putting his teachings into your consciousness. Little by little absorb them. Little by little absorb them. And then if you act from within, when the time comes when you need help, it will be there. It will be there. It's powerful, but you have to make the effort. It's another one of those keys. Study is one of the pillar stones of this path. For many years, I was the secretary to Anandamata, the younger sister of our president, Dayamata. And my office in those days was in the basement of the main building, the international headquarters building at Mother Center. And her office was on the top floor, on the third floor. And the way we worked was she would telephone and say, come up, I need to see you. So I'd run up the stairs, as we always would do, to get there as soon as we could, and go running into the room, sit down, completely out of breath, mind just racing. You can't concentrate when you're huffing and puffing and huffing all the way from the basement. There's no way to avoid it. And she would totally ignore me. She would just sit there and keep working as if I wasn't there at all. And at first it bothered me a little bit. But then I tried to be detached, and I realized, I realized what she was doing was giving me a chance to calm down. so that we could work and I could be in tune with her thoughts and she could share with me. And then I realized, and once I realized that, I realized she always kept a chair outside of her office. And I never saw anyone, sitting out in the hallway working. So I thought, that chair is there for me to sit down. Why should I go in there and disturb her with my huffing and puffing? While she's working, let me settle down. And the first time I did that, I finally got settled down, interiorized my consciousness again, and I heard her little voice say, "You can come in now." It's a sweet little story, isn't it? But what a lesson. What a lesson in life. How many times do we approach, serious circumstances in our life, huffing and puffing, out of breath, restless mind? How many times? But that's a message. If we're to act from soul consciousness, we have to be calm. We have to make a conscious effort to interiorize our consciousness before we think, let alone before we act. I lived in India serving in Guruji's ashrams for almost 20 years continuously. And during that time, I didn't see my parents once, physically see them. And two of those were in those good old days, seems like we've made some progress in this world. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have internet. And to place a telephone call in India, you called the operator and usually waited, without exaggeration, 5 or 6 hours. You finally got the call, a lot of static and noise, and usually got cut off. Then the whole process started over again. So I didn't have a lot of communication with my parents except writing. And something for me personally happened. I began to look beyond their personalities, beyond the experience of the senses, which, it's nice if you and your parents get along, but sometimes as you're growing up, you just don't quite see eye to eye. So it wasn't always totally harmonious. But I began to see beyond all of that. And I began to think of them in terms of their qualities. Their qualities. And I took it one step further. What do I see in myself of those same qualities? And I was able to communicate that to them when I finally came back. And they were very deeply touched. For the first time in my life, I heard my father tell me that he loved me. Very powerful. This is another key to success in life, in your dealings with people. It's a wonderful world. It's a beautiful world. The trouble is people. Do we look at people? Do we build our relationships based upon the message of the senses, the information of our senses, or from a soul, the qualities that we see in people? Think of that. It'll change your life. It'll change your relationship. Think of that. If I'm a soul, maybe there's other souls out there. This is something I learned from Anandamoy Ma, the joy-permeated mother that Master writes about in the autobiography. What is your concept of a person who's materialistic? Big mansion, 9-hole golf course in his backyard, drives around in big Cadillacs. What does it mean to be materialistic? Anandamoy Ma said, you are materialistic if you forget that God is the doer. You are materialistic if you forget that God is the doer. Now, what does that mean? From the Bhagavad Gita, from Guruji, the body-identified man imagines his ego to be the doer of all actions. During all activities performed by the senses, mind, and life force, the egotist thinks, I am the doer. He is engrossed in the I am feelings. I am seen. I am walking. I am living. I am discriminating. I am in control. And so on. The undisciplined man and the self-controlled sage both perform bodily actions. The sensualist is bound by desires, and if he dies without conquering them, he is born again to satisfy his unfulfilled human longings. But the yogi, who performs his duties as enjoined by God without personal motives, that is, from soul consciousness, and realizing that God is the doer, remains free from any karma resulting from working in any way with the body. He is not required to be reborn because of personal desires connected with his body. There's a story in Indian mythology of one of the gods, one of the more benevolent gods. And he had a messenger with him, one of the sages that would go back and forth from the higher realms down to earth. And the messenger was complaining to this god. As they were looking down, there was this poor beggar walking down the road, cursing God for his bad luck, for his poverty, for his lack of opportunities in life, disgruntled. And the messenger said, God, why don't you help him? Why don't you do something? It's so easy for you. And the Lord said, all right. He said, all right. He said, why don't we take this loaf of bread and we'll put this big chunk of gold in the bread, and you take it down and you set it in the road in front of him. Because I don't want him to know it came from me. I said, all right, Lord, that's good. That's good. Let's try this. So the man's going down the road and upset about his life, cursing God left and right. And he said, the only thing worse in life, he said, that God could have cursed me any more than I've already been, is if I would have been born blind. I just think I'll close my eyes and just pretend I'm blind. And walked right past the loaf of bread. How many opportunities in life have we passed by forgetting God? Because our consciousness was so caught up in our problems, in the conflicts of the world, in what we think is our bad luck or our bad karma, and walked right past the lump of gold. Interesting, isn't it? It's a nice little story, but it has some meaning for us if we think about it, about this importance of always acting from this inner consciousness, this awareness that we're spirit. I was once on a bus up in the Himalayas. I'd been staying at our Dwarahat ashram. Early morning. We had about a 5-hour bus trip, I think, along one of the more back graveled roads along the side of some of the really steeper mountains, very narrow, by this small bus, probably with about 30, maybe 35 people crowded in. And one of the last people to get in was this drunk. Now, not that we knew that he drank, but he was drunk. And probably had been for several days from his appearance and his odor. Completely repulsive. And here we are in this crowded, little bus, shoulder to shoulder, middle of the winter, freezing cold. You don't dare, put a window down. And he's raving and talking and babbling and going on, and everyone, as the miles go by, become a little more disgusted with this man, and each one's probably weaving their own thoughts about what a terrible person this is and what a hopeless life he's leading. And we come around this corner on this narrow little road, and there'd been a landslide. Probably about 30 feet of the road was completely covered with rocks and gravel. Not very deep, maybe 2.5, 3 feet deep. And we're on this narrow little mountain road. It's, not a few feet, it's hundreds of feet down the side of this mountain. And we would have had to back up for maybe half a mile to the closest place where we could have turned around. And, to move all that rock and gravel even all those people would have taken days. You needed a tractor or something, some kind of implement. And so we stood around and talked and wondered what to do, and for about 30 minutes, and this drunk went up to the driver and said, "Do you have a shovel?" And the driver kind of laughed and said, "Yeah, I've got a shovel." And let's give it to him. Let's give him the shovel. Maybe he'll leave us alone. That kind of attitude. And they gave him the shovel. And you know what he did? He didn't try to remove all those rocks and stones. He went over to the landslide that was already there and started tapering off the side. And went over to the other side and tapered it off and smoothed out some rough part in the middle, and then told the driver to drive over it. And we did. It worked. It's a nice little story, but do you see what happens to us? You see how circumstances in life can control our minds and our attitudes and our perceptions of people? If we're judging them through the senses and forgetting who's the doer. Who's the doer? It's those qualities, those divine qualities that are in each and every one of us that shine through when we least expect it. Don't forget. Don't ever forget that God is the doer. When you pray, do you believe God's listening? You may ask me, why do I ask that question? Seems rather odd, doesn't it? That I'd ask that? But think about it. When you pray, do you really believe that God's listening? Good. Because He is. He may not always answer in the time and in the way that we might expect, but we must believe. We must believe that God does answer. And sometimes during the really trying, difficult times of life, if we're sincere in our prayers, our outer circumstances may not change at all. But sometimes we receive a little message, some little response that God's saying, I love you, my child. I know what you're going through. I'm right here with you. Let's keep going. I'm here with you. And that's enough, isn't it? It just reminds you how close you really are to God, and that you are connected with God, and you can carry on. You can face. Earlier this year, when I was at Ranchi, during that function that we had for the dedication of the meditation hall, one evening I was on the front porch of the main building, which is the building where Guruji started his school, and that beautiful ashram that we have there. And a devotee approached me, one that I'd known for over 30 years. And I could tell as she approached me that there was something very deeply troubling her. And she came up and almost with tears in her eyes said, Swamiji, Swamiji, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? She said, years ago, when our beloved Dayamata was in India, she gave me a little Krishna pendant that I've worn all these years. And it's been my protection, my inspiration, and I've lost it. The little ring that held it on finally wore out. I've lost it. We've looked everywhere. It was tiny. And she said, what am I going to do? She said, I've been praying and calling to God. It meant so much to me. What am I going to do? And I thought for a minute, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I started praying as desperately as she was. And then a thought came to me. A thought came to me that maybe 2 years before, I had been with Ma before the departure of one of my trips to India, and she'd given me this little box. And she said, Vishwananda, these are some little things that I used to take with me when I went to India, and I used to give them to devotees sometimes, little things. And she said, you take these with you, and if you ever have the opportunity, you could give them out like I used to do. So I thought about that. I had kept it in my room at Ranchi. So I said, excuse me for a minute, I've got something I need to do. So I left the devotee, I went upstairs, I opened the little box, and it had, these Rudraksha beads and little statues and different things. And there was one little packet, maybe 2 inches by 2 inches square, wrapped in paper. I didn't even know what was in it. I opened it up. It was a little Krishna statue. So I took it down. She held out her hand. She didn't say a word. Didn't say a word. She just and walked off. I knew it was the same that Ma had probably had for 30 years. Coincidence? No, you have to understand. This world of duality is based upon some very exacting laws of cause and effect. And if you understand that, nothing happens by chance. Nothing happens by chance. God is the doer. God is the doer. And we transcend even the laws of cause and effect with our devotion and our love. Very important to remember. Very important to remember. When I received my Kriya initiation at Ranchi in India in the early 1970s, when our beloved Ma was there, she performed it. And it was done outside under this little covered area, almost all of us sitting cross-legged. And during the rose ceremony, and I had sat in the back, and during the rose chant, the rose ceremony, I was watching Ma. It was so beautiful to see her flowing robes and her long hair flowing, looking like a rishi, an ancient rishi, radiant, radiant after the Kriya, after performing, the instrument for the Guru. And I noticed in front of me, there was this man sitting cross-legged, and he had his hands like this up at the juncture of his thighs. And I saw Ma take the flowers and throw them so they landed in his hands. And I thought, that's wonderful. I said, I'm going to do that. You watch, Ma's going to throw those flowers right in my hand too. And she continued on. There were others in front of me getting closer and closer. And then the thought came to me, no, that's ridiculous. That's very egotistical of me to even think that Ma would do that. That was something special for that devotee. This is your Kriya initiation. So I turned my hands up like this. and was meditating. And suddenly something hit me in the chest. And I looked down, and what Ma had done, she wasn't sprinkling the petals on my head. She'd thrown them at me and hit me in the chest. Well, I thought, that's all right. That's something pretty special. But trying to figure out, why did she do that? And I looked down, and the flowers had slid down my chest into my hands. You think we have control of our lives? No. God is the doer. God is the doer. And when we surrender our ego to God, then that communion can flow. Then that inner guidance can flow. Then that divine joy, that love, can flow into your life. And that's what carries us through the challenges of the day. Sometimes there are some very big tests and trials in life, isn't it? Some of us may have really good karma and not face them, but interestingly enough, something that I learned from Brother Anandamoy in one of his talks. Now, we don't know where we are on the evolutionary ladder. And when we receive Kriya Yoga initiation, the Guru promises that if we make the effort, that he will lead us to and we will find God in this lifetime. Quite a promise, isn't it? And you think that Guru wants us to kind of mope along and drag along? No, I don't think so. I think that Guru wants us to get back home just as quickly as we possibly can. The Guru will never give us more than we can take. But sometimes the Guru will give us those tests and those trials or those experiences that we need to break the final chains. We don't know how close we are. Maybe that big test that seems so insurmountable is the last one. Not that it matters, but it might be. It might be the last one. From Guruji's Gita commentary, man himself by his actions reaps the results of his good and bad karma owing to the proper use or misuse of his free will. Often it's not that God or Guru are even testing us. It's our own debt. No, we don't run away from the bank every month when we have our mortgage payment or insurance payment, do we? No, we make those pretty regularly. But sometimes we run away from our karmic debts, isn't it? We run away from them. We don't accept them, in other words, as being our own, that we might have caused this to happen to ourselves, and especially in a world that likes to point its finger everywhere else, except here. That's the world we live in. And Guruji went on to say, in this sense, God does not remain in this universe as a watcher of human beings, constantly rewarding or punishing them according to their virtues or sins. But he made laws which do mete out in variable justice. So regardless of what's happening to us in our lives, we have to have this attitude, this soul attitude, that's really not happening to me. If I'm a soul, if I'm spirit, it's really not happening to me. I've caused this through my past wrong actions, wrong thinking, whatever it was, and this is a debt that I have to pay. And sometimes our actions don't seem to bring results. You know, I had a particular test in my life. It kept coming back and coming back and coming back in different forms, but I knew it was the same thing that I had to work on. And I was working, really hard on this, trying to overcome it, thinking that I could control it. I was going to overcome it. And one day I woke up and I realized God was trying to teach me patience. It had nothing to do with what was happening outwardly or the circumstances that kept recurring. God just wanted me to be patient. He was teaching me a divine spiritual quality. And I would have never gained control. If I would have, I wouldn't have learned the lesson. So we have to look upon life a little differently. We have to look upon our tests and trials a little differently. And in fact, learn to embrace them as opportunities to clear away the past karma that we ourselves created, to pay our debt, and also to exercise our soul qualities, to bring God in, to bring in God's joy, to bring in God's understanding, to bring in God's patience, to bring in God's love. That's who we are. That's who we are, to express who we really are. And in so doing, we're not creating any new karma. We're burning out our old karma. And we're on the path of breaking those final bonds that lead to that final state of realization. One last one. If you find yourself passing through hell, keep going. That's pretty profound, isn't it? Keep on keeping on. Keep on keeping on. One of the things I learned from my father, he used to say, even if you fall flat on your face, what do? Do you lay there and just grovel with your face in the mud? Or do you get up and move on? He said, if you get up, you've progressed at least this far. Have hope. Have hope. Have faith. Have trust. Have the assurance that you are blessed by God. You live under the umbrella of a special dispensation sent by God for this age. The gurus know the challenges of our lives. The gurus know the ups and downs. The gurus know the nature of the battles that we have to face. And they've given us special blessings. They've told us the purpose of life is to find God. Very, very important, isn't it? They show us that God is the doer, that we're not. Ultimately, we can't control. What we can control is our consciousness. What we can control is our awareness of God, and then express that through our actions. That's what we can control. It begins with meditation. It begins with meditation. And it begins by living our lives, every moment of our lives, expressing free choice in choosing to apply our Guru's teachings, to follow our intuition, that inner sense that we gradually develop. We open up our hearts through love and devotion to God so that that divine love can flow through us. If we want to change the world, you know what we can change? Ourselves. Ourselves. We can change the world. We can do it by changing ourselves. If we become more peaceful, the world is more peaceful. If we become more understanding, the world is more understanding. If we become more loving, the world is more loving. It's filled with more divine love. That we can do because love is more powerful. The love of God is more powerful. It's the saving grace that transcends the tug of war, the laws of duality, the cause and effect, the positive and the negative. That we can change from the center of our true being, from our soul, from our awareness of God, from the realization that we are one with God. I was with Ma recently, a group of us, and we were talking about the challenges of the work and spreading Master's teachings. And I think our minds were probably a little too caught up in all the details and the things that we thought needed to be done. And Ma just suddenly said, "You all have to become saints." And just like you, we all laughed. And Ma joined in. It was very sweet. Just this sweet little laughter. And after the laughter died down, she very quietly, but also very powerfully said, "I'm serious, you know." Now, she wasn't saying, "Let's go out and let's be saints." Her own life is proof of that. That radiant, divine, powerful soul that Ma is. You look at the accomplishments of her life. She could have commanded any stage, any spiritual stage in India, in this country, anywhere in the world. People would have flocked to her by the thousands. And I saw this in India. When she was there in 1972 and 73, one evening, she was giving a farewell satsang to a group of devotees in a public temple. And I think it was a weekend night. There was a lot of local people coming in. We were in an adjacent room. And the vast majority of those people who were coming there were just common folk who didn't even understand English. But Ma, just the vibration that she had created in that room, and those simple people were so receptive that they started crowding and pushing in to have darshan, to touch her feet for her blessing. And those of us who were there, the monastics, actually had shoulder to shoulder with arms around each other, form a ring around Ma and lead her out so that she wasn't crushed. That's the power of her divine love. And yet, that was almost 40 years ago. How has she chosen to live her life? She's 93 now. How has she chosen to live her life? Quietly, humbly serving her Guru. Quietly, humbly showing us, we have a perfect Guru. In Ma, we have a perfect disciple. We have an example. We have a perfect example in Ma. She asked us to be saints because she knew that that's what our soul wants. She knows that if we really apply these teachings, if we really try to live, it's not to be a saint, but it's to live a saintly life. That's the blessing that we have. And that's what Ma has asked all of us, not just us few, but I pass that on to all of us, to not lose sight of the very special blessing that's upon our lives. And where does it lead? I received this letter just a few days ago from a very old friend who wasn't able to come to Convocation this year. I don't hear from him often. Usually I see him here at Convocation and we say hello. Otherwise our friendship's on a higher level. I don't need to talk with him or communicate with him. But here's what he wrote. As I have gotten older, he seems to be with me more and more. Whenever I stop and settle my mind for even a moment, I feel his presence. I constantly bug him with questions, and he answers each one in his time. What a Guru we have. How lucky we are. I can hardly wait for myself to disappear, and there will be only Spirit. I'd like to close with these words. Many, many years ago, I had a little book that I used to carry with me. Almost everywhere I went, whenever I had a spare moment, I'd open it and read it. It had some lectures of Ma's. And she saw me carrying that book and asked me what it was, and I showed it to her. And so she wrote something in the front. I'd like to share that with you. as my closing this evening. And this is a message to each of you. It's a universal message. It's the message of all of us who've been drawn to this blessed path. It's a message for all of us as we strive to love and know God. And she wrote, "May you surrender your heart to Divine Mother and Guru Dev, that you too may become a true, faithful devotee, now and always."